You're listening to Unmuted Love. Hi there, I'm Ce Eshelman, and with 35 years as a marriage and family therapist and 25 years as a parent of 2 children I brought home from the foster care system, I want to welcome you here to Unmuted Love Podcast, the one place where nothing is off limits to say out loud about parenting children from difficult beginnings.
Stop for a minute, stop and breathe for a minute, long it over your head, try to listen instead, won't you? Think for a minute, who you want to be for a minute, don't get over your head, you're like everyone else, aren't you?
Sometimes it's real sweet around here, and sometimes it ain't so pretty, because this is 100% Unmuted Love. So let's go.
You'll be just
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Unmuted Love. I am here today for part 3 of Brave Love, our 6-part series with Amanda Savarino. I'm so delighted to be here and to meet up again. And today we've decided that a really great topic would be community and how important that is. It's here, Amanda just reminded me, why is it here in the series? Well, it's here because last week we talked about shame and how significantly and severely isolating shame is to us and to our families. And we get just trapped in our homes and we're shamed and embarrassed and afraid and worried, and we end up with no friends and no family and we're just alone. And so, hey, let's talk about community. Amanda, you're on.
Hello. Hello, everybody. I'm so excited to be back. I'm so excited to be moving into the forward motion part of the 6-part series. We've been sort of talking about the struggle and the isolation and the hardness of living a life like this. And now we're in the building parts of it. And this part, to me, was the scariest part, the vulnerability involved with connecting with other people. So I'm excited to spend time talking about that and sharing some resources. I think I might even talk about 1 or 2 of them in the podcast. I've been sending them to see to add in the show notes, but there's a couple I actually want to talk about because they helped me so much. I'm kind of blindsiding you because I did not put this in our outline.
It's okay. It's okay because we haven't followed an outline yet, so I don't think we're going to start today.
It's so true.
So yeah, I mean, I am such a loner myself, and those of you who know me, you know I'm avoidant attachment style. And though I've come a long way since the beginning roots of my avoidant attachment, I still have tendencies to just keep it all in and not reach out and think I don't need to reach out. And so when I was bringing up my kids, the shame and all the behavior and all the isolation kind of felt strangely good because I could be alone with it and I didn't have to be as shamed or as embarrassed or anything, right? Because no one could see me. No one was able to see what was going on in my home. And I was kind of happy about that until I started to drown. And it turned out, oh, even I need people. I need community. So I did get around to needing it, but it took me a long time before I realized that, oh, I'm drowning because I have no support. I have nothing. I'm just me. It's me and my kids against the world. It just wasn't good enough. Wasn't going to make it. And I wasn't going to make it through. Plus, it wasn't fair to my kids either, right? They need to be exposed to the world. So that's my story.
So you kind of built the ultimate community. You went from one end to the other. You're the leader of a community now.
Right. Exactly. So weird.
You're like, I'm fine alone. Never mind. I'm going to run a whole universe here. So I was the same. I would say I was happy, but I would say that keeping it contained and to ourselves was very much the method I was going to use until I realized we needed more help. Like you said, I was drowning. I needed professionals. I needed to consult with people. I needed advice. And sort of what we talked about last week, I was afraid to reach out to them because I was afraid they would find out how bad it was. And so that was the beginning of me needing to sit and say, okay, and then what would happen? Have myself play out, and then what would happen, and then what would happen? And it would still have been better than staying isolated the way that we were. So that was how I decided to rip off the Band-Aid, to say it out loud, starting with helping professionals that weren't particularly helpful. And then moving on to trying to find actual people with a shared experience, which is where I started to really grow and like challenge myself.
Yeah, I started there too. I reached out to a therapist, of course, and I'm going to tell you this brutal story. So I reached out to the only therapist in town who was hanging out a shingle called attachment therapy, something that I didn't even know existed, but I found her, but I didn't know what it looked like at all in the early years. So I would take my children there one at a time on different days. And we would come into her office and I would hold my daughter across my lap and my daughter would spit and scream and struggle and pee in my lap. And this therapist would sit across from me, sort of almost provoking her to do that. And I was like, why are we doing this? I don't get this. I think about 3 times in, I said to her, okay, whatever this is, great. But what about parenting? How do I deal with like what I'm living with at home? And she looked up and she said, oh, I don't do parenting. I was like, you're fired.
That is the craziest, like, attachment without parenting. Like, in what kind of alternate universe can you be focused on attachment and not do parenting? That's wild. Yep. I had a similar advice to try to distract my child though with movies and then get as close as I possibly could to him very slow, like basically sneak up on him on the couch because he wouldn't let me touch him.
Yeah.
And so I would move closer and closer. And of course he has like super radar. So every time I move, he's hyper vigilant. That kid's scooting. We are like chasing each other very slowly around the couch, one little shuffle at a time. And that was like the best they could do. Put on a Disney movie and try to get close to him. And then, other things, but kind of what you had to do where it was like, when they're upset, hold them really tight until they surrender, which I tried, which was so incredibly damaging to our relationship. Way to destroy trust. Yeah. And that was all that was available. So community.
Well, so when you start with professionals, sometimes you don't get community because what is a professional? They're a person who sees you 1 hour a week.
Yeah.
If you can afford that, and that's it. And then you're out on your own again. So it's definitely not actually a community.
It's not. It's sort of I feel like with everyone I've talked to, it's sort of when you realize you're desperate enough to reach out, you start there. There are great professionals. You're one of them. But you still need community. That 1 hour a week is never going to be what you need. It's never going to fill that void in your life. It's never going to bring the amount of growth that you need to find in the amount of time you need to find it. So,
right. But how do you find it if you're so isolated? I mean, what did you do? What did you do to find something outside of professionals?
So for me, it was very scary. So the closest I could get to building community was to try to find books that came kind of somewhere close to what I needed to be hearing and learning. And if I was lucky, I could find like a book review online and read it. It was like dipping my toe in to normalizing our life. Does that make sense? It was the beginning of me hearing other people say, not out loud because they were books, but verbalize what I was living, which I had not experienced. And when I could do that and then read their reviews, see the responses, I sort of started to be like, okay, I'm not alone. It's okay to say these things out loud. This person did it. And that was the first step. And I think had there been like podcasts or websites, they didn't exist at the time, as far as I know, those would have been even better because there's so much more community involved in things like that than in a book. So that was step 1 for me. Just being able to sit with someone else's experience secondhand. I don't know if that resonates. I was too scared to open myself up to real people.
I did the same thing, only I went to reading clinical books on what's going on. Okay, I need to read books on attachment. I read these really thick books on attachment and one book after another, and they were very convoluted and involved and psychobabble like crazy, but I'm smart. So I was just like taking it all in. But along the way, I realized, oh, my children have attachment issues and I have attachment issues. I didn't know that. So the avoidant attachment style is an attachment issue. Oh, bonk. That's like being bonked on the head. And then when I started drowning, I realized, oh, I'm drowning because I actually have attachment issues that keeps me from reaching out. And I need attachment. I need to connect with people who see me and understand me and hold my reality and don't deny my reality and that kind of thing. And that was resonating with all the things I was reading in the books on attachment. Like, what is attachment and why do we need community? And so I think that might be a really important thing to talk a little more about. It's like, well, okay, what does that mean to need community? And it's an attachment issue, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it makes so much sense the way you're saying it. The thing that our children need in order for their attachment wounds to be healed, for their brains, that plastic brain of theirs to start to change, is exactly the things we need, because it's what every human needs. We need a human being to see us without judging us, with compassionate eyes, and continue to show up over and over again in a safe way. That's what our kids need, and that's what we need. And I don't think there's any way forward without it, right? Because how can you heal that inside of yourself so that you can give it to your children? It's not something that a human being can do by themselves. It's not physiologically possible.
Right. And it's that intersubjective relationship that brains have with other brains, right? We're hardwired for love. We're hardwired for connection. We're hardwired for attachment. And we either give it to ourselves or we don't, or it was hurt in childhood like it was in mine. And so mine isn't quite wired like I think I need it. Mine's wired like I'm afraid to do it, so I just don't need it. But obviously, when you start breaking down and start feeling a little suicidal about how alone you are,
right.
You're alone with two children who are climbing the walls. It's like, oh, okay, then it comes up, as a need, and then community becomes so important. And it's not just any community. It's not like going to any bar and connecting, right? I can't go to a bar and connect and think that this is going to meet my needs, right? And it has to be that intersubjective, I know that you know that I know you, right? That's what intersubjective means. It's like you are looking at somebody, they're giving you soft and genuine eye contact, they're talking to you like you matter, and they're listening to you, and they're sharing with you in that reciprocal kind of way. That is the definition of attachment. Once you get that, especially if you haven't had it in childhood and you haven't given it to yourself out of fear, it's like, oh, this is kind of delicious, right? This is kind of delightful. This is, wow, this is awesome.
Yeah. This is a magical thing. I get what everyone was talking about. Yeah. If your life has been relationship and connection have been scary in your life up until the point you bring your kids home, even if you don't realize that's how you're approaching it, your kids will quickly highlight it if they have attachment or a trauma. Mm-hmm. And I want to dispel the thinking in this section that it needs to be a life partner or a co-parent that you're getting this from. I found it in friendships deeply. And I have my husband is my co-parent and life partner, and we have a good relationship, but I needed to be in relationship with members of the community, not just a person in my home. So this is not something that's like relationship attachment healing specific. It's community and broader relationships. And sometimes when I work with single parents, they can get discouraged thinking that this is something that they would do with a spouse. And for me, it involved a lot of vulnerability. And I feel like for you too, I had to really put myself out there. I had to solicit connections with people. I ended up needing to homeschool because school it didn't feel like it was going to work for us. It was something that I was fortunate to be able to do. So I was like trying to connect with the greater community and just build any kind of connection. And that was a scary, vulnerable thing to do. But like you said earlier, when the alternative is that you're suicidal, it doesn't seem so scary anymore. It gets to a point where it's the lesser of two evils. I had to try and fail and try and fail and try and fail a few times. It wasn't like I'd made this decision and then the next day I found the person that I was going to connect with.
Right.
It takes trial and error. It's a process. Yeah.
And for me, I was so avoidant. I never knew that that's what I was, of course, until I read all these books and I had these kids who were like right in my face with, oh, you don't really have any friends, or you don't really think you need friends and all that. Right. And so once I learned about it, I was like, oh, I actually have a problem with this. But then I was like, it wasn't like I had cultivated friendships, or cultivated very many. I have a handful of friends that I've had forever, and I keep them close, right? Those 5 people are my people. But I don't really let very many people in. And those 5 people turn out to be not really that able to understand this whole parenting thing, not able to understand how chaotic my life has suddenly become. And I'm not so much fun to be around anymore. It's not fun to go to dinner parties with me anymore. It's not fun to go anywhere with me anymore. And so even the 5 people who I really love and still love me, they took a little bow and just bowed out a little bit. And so I was really alone. So I actually had to put an ad out in the world saying, I want to start a group for kids who are like this to have playtime, free, unstructured playtime with supervision so they can get together because they're kind of isolated too. And parents are isolated and I would love to join my own group. So I want to invite you to come. And I just really had a great turnout for that. And I had space to do it in. And so, I mean, we really had an awesome group of people show up. They had information and they shared information. They shared where they were at. We really connected. And then individual relationships sort of grew out of that. So I'm saying this sort of out loud and specifically because I think a lot of people have wounded attachments in childhood, and it makes making friends hard. It makes reaching out even harder, right? I mean, if you have a completely secure attachment, making friends is easy for you pretty much. You know, you might find it hard to find a community like ours, but you make friends, you know, and in lines and, you know, at school and in places because you are open and you're chatty and you connect. But if you have a wound in your childhood, you're not really big on that. You're quiet. You stand back. You don't reach out. You don't connect. You don't join. Or if you do it to serve and you don't do it to do anything else. So anyway, I had to do it this very official way. I could not figure out how else to do it.
Yeah.
I had no idea where I would do it, you know?
Same. I was like, okay, we'll make meetup days for the homeschool group. It'll be from this time to this time. It was a similar thing. And I've also, my whole life, struggled with friendships and I always will have like one or two very close friends. And that's kind of all I can maintain. And then if those friends don't happen, like you said, to be able to show up for you in this way, then what? Luckily, the same that happened for you, that group turned into very specific friendships that have endured for me. But there's another part about this that I think is important to talk about, especially if you're building community in this way with other adoptive families, which are the ones that are going to understand you. The tension or the difficulty with sometimes gathering a group of children together that have attachment wounds and early trauma and parents in one place. And it sounds like because you had supervision and you had the skills in the space, that was really successful. But I encountered a lot of difficulty doing that. These kids are sometimes, they can be volatile if you put them all in one place.
That's right.
So
that's right.
there would be no time for the parents to connect. It was just like putting out fires and managing, which was honestly causing more harm than good in a few of the situations. So that's a whole other thing. That's something I want to talk about is you can build a community that's just for you, just for the adult. Mm-hmm. Your kids don't need to get along with their kids. They don't need to have the same interests. And also what happened with me is we built a community where our kids did get along, but as is inevitable, I feel like with these kiddos, they damaged those relationships. You know, sometimes it was my kid, sometimes it was someone else's kid that was really struggling to show up in a safe way. And that can get tricky for the adults, you know, getting enmeshed in kids' relationships. Luckily, we had been friends long enough that we navigated it. And our children no longer speak, but we're still very close. And these are just things you need to talk about and say out loud and think about and are going to be always a part of your life with kiddos who have attachments like this. It's kind of part of the program.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing, right? Is just understanding that it's not going to be always smooth. And that was the same thing that happened with me. Like when we did part out and I found somebody I really connected with, we'd get the kids together and I could see, oh, they're not a really good fit, you know, and we would try to do it and then it didn't work. And, you know, that's just part of it. It's trial and error and until you find the right combination, and that takes a little bit of effort, but it's so worth it, right? Because coming out of the darkness of isolation is like coming into sunlight. It's warm, it's cozy, it feels good, and it's joyful. Being seen is like everything, right?
It was the first time I felt joy when I found a person who, she called them like my big scaries. When I could tell her my big scaries and she could just receive them with a smile and say, you know, me too. And I still think you're an amazing human being and we're going to figure this out. When I found that person, which took years and years, but when I found her and then her whole family, it was the first time I had felt true joy and hope in years. something about finding someone who is dealing with the same things you're dealing with, for me, provided me with a new inroad, a new access to self-compassion. Because when I saw her struggling with the things that I was struggling with, I could be so much more generous, in my opinion, of how she handled it, seeing it from the outside, than I could internally for myself when I was in the same moment. And vice versa with her kids. Seeing her kids with the same behaviors my kids had, struggling, so much easier to bring a more compassionate eye to than when it's in my house with my own children. That really helped me. And I'm sure you know the therapeutic reason for that, but it was fantastic. It was like, it changed my life. I was like, I love you and you're doing this, so I must not be as bad as I think I am.
Right. Well, it's,
like,
it's normalizing, right? It's just like, oh,
right.
Okay. There are other people like me versus nobody would understand this because it's just too crazy, right? Which is what we often think. It's too wild. It's too crazy. It's too unusual, but it's actually not unusual because trauma impacts brains and children's behavior because of that very, very similarly. And so while they may be slightly different, at one time or another, they probably had something like it or similar. And so trauma is trauma and brains are brains. And so it turns out we aren't alone. We just think we are. And that's the beauty of community, is finding that out.
Yeah. I love that you said normalize. I say this is like my mantra. I'm chanting it. Normalize, normalize, normalize. I'm saying this like in work meetings. I'm saying this to clients. I'm saying this in my house. Like, there's how we get the shame out and we can see our connection. You saying the things out loud and me saying the things out loud. Oh, wow. We're going through the same things. Look at that. Mm-hmm. And there's connection there. And it's such an important part of it. I feel like we should talk about
oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
We're probably going to say the same thing, but we should talk about what kind of community, like what are we looking for in our community? What's a productive, safe community to be in? Yeah.
How do you find it? What are they? What do they look like? Because people are really struggling sometimes and they can't, when you're drowning, you don't have access to your full brain either, your full prefrontal cortex. So it's kind of hard to think out of the box. So let's think out of the box out loud for folks to maybe talk about all the ways you can look for community that maybe they hadn't thought of before.
For me, a really powerful way to find community is to find a virtual community or a local adoption community that has a very structured support group, a support group that's moderated or has an education component to it. These are pre-existing things you can sort of dip into. And it's a good, healthy, for the most part, way to find people that are kind of in the same place on their journey as you are. They're seeking and they're in a growth mindset. And if it's moderated or organized in some way, it tends to keep you moving in a more forward direction because there are some pitfalls.
Like all the Facebook groups where they're not moderated and people hate their children out loud. And just get into a negative feedback spiral around it, and other people jump on board that wagon. And to me, there isn't anything more hopeless than getting into one of those hopeless spirals with other parents. And then it's like, how do you find your way out of that? If there isn't somebody jumping in and saying, hey, there's hope. There are ways, there are answers, there are solutions to this. This is not a hopeless situation. It feels hopeless. That's different. Feelings are not facts. And there are proven effective ways to begin to rise up out of it. If the community that you join is not moderated by somebody who has that growth mindset, then you're getting something else. And you have to be very careful. So it at first feels great, sort of like, oh yeah, she spit in my soup. Oh, it's disgusting. That kind of thing. It's like, yeah, mine too. And, there's some camaraderie in that, some normalizing of that. But then if there's no like, oh, but how did you deal with it in a way that was healing, that, moves things forward. If you don't have that voice, then it's camaraderie around the negative and there's no way out.
It's so appealing though, because it's the easier path in the beginning, not in the long term. In the beginning, when you're struggling and at least for me, I was very resentful, not just towards my child, but the adoption community at large for the narrative that I had been sort of given, my specific adoption agency. I was very frustrated that I wasn't given more tools and more honest information. And I was frustrated with my child. And it's very appealing to just find a silo, a community of people that will say, you're right. Everything you're thinking is right. It's an injustice. We can all unite behind that and blame them and blame our children. Because the hard work of self-compassion, self-actualization, internal growth, all of these things, that takes effort. So it kind of looks like the easy path to get into those communities. It's not, because your life continues to get harder and harder and harder the longer you stay in that place. we can check for specific things in these communities when we find them, like moderated. That's key. Somebody needs to be, or ideally more than one person, like there's a couple people or a group that is farther down the road, has seen a progression, has seen some success, and has tools. If there's no tools or education being offered, if there's no new ideas, that's a big red flag to me. And tools for growth, not just how do we get these children out of our house? Like some places
Right.
are very centered on that. And I'm not saying that's never a conversation to have. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying if that's the only thing we're talking about is how it's the kids' fault and we need to separate them from the rest of the family, that's probably not a space you want to spend a lot of time in. There needs to be growth mindset.
Yeah, I totally see that difference too, right? It's one thing to be able to say out loud, I just really want to pitch him down the river.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Be safe enough to say how you feel and then be open and have other people say, yeah, me too. I get that. And here's another option,
Yeah.
Try this. Have you tried this? And let's figure out what might work in your situation with your child. And the anthem of nothing works is not the truth. It's a feeling again. Nothing works is a feeling. It's not actually a fact. You have to find the things that work. And that is hard. I know, but they're there. They exist. And so finding a community where people are like, hey, here's the win. I got a win. 2 years ago I was here, but look, we're over here now. When you're seeing people report that kind of movement, then you're in the right place, right? Because you're seeing the change and you're seeing the evolution in the relationships as they heal. And they do heal. They don't spring into health. That's a myth. Nobody just goes, oh, I found what works. And it took 2 weeks and boom, they were good. No, that's not. That's the lie of the devil. I say it's the lie of the devil.
Don't fall for that.
It takes a long time. It takes a long time to make changes, but the changes do matter, and your life does get better little by little over time. When you look back, it's sort of like, whoa, where I came from to where I am right now is a miracle.
It feels that way. Once you find the right tools, it still takes effort. It still takes work. You're always improving what you can do and how you can show up for your kids. But it absolutely is true. And if people are highlighting each other's growth for them, that's also, I find, a great thing. Like, hey, I know you're struggling, but I just want to say 6 months ago when this happened, remember? And I'm not saying we need to silver lining people's struggles. I know this is like a tightrope that you walk a little bit. You don't want to be that person that's like, yeah, but it could be worse. That's not the energy we're looking for. There's very much an energy of like, I see you, I hear you, this is hard. And another thing I think it's important to just be on the lookout for is if there's a lot of judgment towards the children, if there's a lot of expectations that they're the ones that are doing all the improving and it's not a discussion about how the adults are doing the work, that's not a productive space because the kids are never going to go first. They have to feel safe before they can do it. And so the adults always have to go first. So if it's very kid focused, even if it feels positive, right? Even if the energy is positive and they're like, I'm rooting him on, but you're only talking about the kids, you're missing a foundational piece.
Because it's you first, right? Parents first.
Always.
You got to take care of yourselves. You have to do your own work, do your own healing. You have to do your own learning. You have to practice. You have to get your own support. You have to find a community, right? This is all parent work. And then when you start applying what you've learned and you're able to, because you've done some healing, your children follow. That's just how it goes.
It does. It really, really does. And, if you haven't been approaching it that way, if you've been very much, and I don't blame anyone because this is how almost all of us are, if you've been focused on behavior, you've been trying to do like reward charts or punitive things, like taking things away or bribing them or, whatever it is, these like more traditional ways of parenting. If you've been in that space, it seems to only be getting worse. It's hard to believe that you taking time to take care of yourself so you can show up with more patience, to learn your attachment style and understand how you can start to heal that, to build open and honest relationships with your children, which is really scary. It's hard to believe those things are going to change. If you're like, I've been working so hard, running in circles, doing backflips. How can me doing these like softer skills really change things? But it's the only way.
Right. Well, it comes back to attachment, right? Those softer skills are attachment skills. That's how parenting was meant to be from the get-go, right? And our kids had a left turn taken on them, right? What happened to them? And some of us had that left turn taken on us. So what happened to us? And so we lost sight of some of the basics, right? Of connection and attachment, attunement, and being present, showing up to play, showing up to have those eyes that say, I really love you. You're the best thing since sliced bread. Having a voice tone that just sounds loving, soft facial expression, all the things that say love, 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 which is what attachment is. Even if your feelings aren't in love, you can still show up as a loving person. You can learn attunement. You can learn attachment skills, which is what some of the online communities can help you with, is to learn some of that and to move the ball down the field a little bit further.
Well, a big shout out for your online community. It's a beautiful space. And I personally know human beings that have benefited tremendously from it. So it's not just, I'm not just shouting you out because I'm on your podcast.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. There are a few. And so C already knows about them, but I'll put them in the show notes. And I love C's tremendously. But there are a few online communities, only a few that I know of, just 3 actually, that I feel like are really safe, productive, good uses of your time and energy, where the people moderating them have actual lived experience, which for me has been vital. People who have lived experience have the deepest understanding of the work that needs to be done. And so that's always something I'm looking for. And I'm sure it's possible for a professional to deeply understand it without lived experience, but I haven't found that person yet.
Nor have I. And
Right.
I have tried to train people who didn't have the lived experience with all the lived experience that I have, and it's still different. They still don't really get the depth of the despair you can have, the depth of the loneliness you can have, the depth of the disturbance in your home. I mean, it's really hard to understand if you haven't lived it.
It's a special kind of like core shaking experience that I'm sure that there's ones we haven't had that are similar with illness or catastrophic events that we could never understand unless we experienced it. But this is one of those things, I think. It's such a primally shaking, shattering experience for a relationship that you assumed was going to be so natural to feel so damaging for everyone involved. Not a lot of people understand it.
Everything you have to keep going.
Everything.
And that's why you need a community, right? To lift you up and to confront you if you need a little confrontation sometimes. Sometimes in my community, I do groups in my community and the parents will be there and someone will have been there a long time. So I know they know all the fundamental things. And just on this particular week, they completely lost their minds. And like, well, I took away everything. I just cleaned the room out. No furniture. I took the bed off. I put it on the floor. I took all their clothes. They have just one, set of, I'm like, okay, so do you want some feedback?
Yeah. Are you open to feedback?
Like, okay. All right. So, okay, you might have lost your mind a little bit there. You might have flipped your lid and you forgot that therapeutic parenting is what we're doing and that it's what works and that this part is the old you, right? The old part. And like, oh, I didn't even realize it.
You're right. Man, it's so much easier to get that feedback from another adoptive parent than from, Joe Schmo in the community. So that's, again, So I wanted to also, I think I talked about this at the sort of the beginning of the episode, but I wanted to talk about a couple of things that I have found they didn't exist when I needed them, but I've actually done them anyway since, and I share them with other people that might be helpful for getting over that hump. And for me, building up just like a speck of self-compassion helped me so much with being brave enough to connect because I needed to feel worthy of connection. I needed to feel like I was even bringing something in order to show up. And so there is an author, Kristen Neff, Neff, and she has an amazing book about self-compassion on her own. But what I find sometimes when you're in this state of like overwhelm and toxic stress is that reading a book is just not on the table. So she also has a workbook, which is more in line with what I needed as far as like the small doses with actual practical application. So Kristen Neff and Christopher Germer co-wrote a workbook that you do not need to read her main book to do. It's a standalone thing, and it's very good. I've seen a lot and tried a lot and, interacted with a lot of things, but this one's actually helpful. It's in small chunks. There are practices, daily practices built into it. It's about building behaviors. It's about building internal tools for these moments. And I just highly recommend it. And you can do it before you find a community with a person that you find that might want to do it. But it's well researched and a good resource.
What's the title?
It is called Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook by Kristen Neff and Christopher Germer. You can find it on anywhere that you buy books. If you're one of these people, I recommend cutting the binding off and make it spiral bound, because I go back to it over and over and over again, and I will like look at the exercises. So something to recommend, and it'll be in the show notes with everything. Else.
For sure. Yeah. And there are lots of books on self-compassion. Like Tara Brach has a lot of Radical Acceptance and Radical Compassion are two of my favorite books. They're actually similar, but different and really helpful to learn some of those tools too. It's mindfulness too, right?
Mindfulness is kind of the key, because you have to catch yourself in order to do any of this stuff. I think whatever format you can take it in, that's the format for you. If you need a workbook, if you can read a book, if you can an audiobook, Kristen Neff's website has a ton of little like quick tools and assessments and quick interactive things. But any of these authors, their tools that they have available, find the one that works. Don't give up.
Right. And that's the thing. Don't give up. You know, sometimes one person's version just doesn't suit you, doesn't fit you, it feels too woo-woo or something for you. That's okay.
Yeah.
Go to the next one, right? Because there's going to be one that does fit, because they're out there now. And the work is so good. It's so good to start having self-compassion, you know, like, oh, I did that. I acknowledge I did that. I repair from doing that. And now I forgive myself, right? That's what self-compassion really sounds like.
Yep. And that is sort of, for me, the key to like putting yourself out there. You're like, I'm worth it. I'm worth it. My kid's worth it. My life is worth taking this risk and finding this community. Sometimes just a podcast. A lot of these people who have communities like C have also a podcast. And so just dip in, listen to the podcast, think about what you might say to respond, you know, just work your way up. Then you could join their community or maybe another community that's talking about what the work that person's doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And, you know, those people, if you do find a podcast that you like, it's a little bit like having a TV show that has series, right? And you watch them until you really know the characters, and the characters are like really important to you and they become like friends, you know, like, oh, I love this character. And it's like that on a podcast too. You get to know the people, you hear them week after week, and it actually feels good to have that kind of consistency, even if it's someone you don't know. Right? Because you start to hear their idiosyncrasies, you get to know them, and that feels good. And in a way, it's like being seen, because they're telling you their story, like Amanda and I are telling you our story, and we're hoping that you feel seen through us sharing with you, because that's our whole purpose. And what both of us do is really our whole purpose of being these open books is not because we're so extroverted that we really want everybody to see every inch of our shame and things. No, it's that we want to be that for you. We want to be a community for you if you can't get to one. So that's what we do every day.
That's a perfect description, C. That's exactly it. I want to make that space for you to see that you're not alone, so that you will go out and take care of yourself in the way that will help everyone, including you.
Yeah.
Because you are worth the risk, you and your family and everybody.
That's right. You're the most important person in the room. That's what I always like to say. And it's true.
That is right. You are. Mm-hmm. You're like the change maker. You are.
Yeah. You can look in the show notes for resources. Amanda does a great job of putting together resources for each of these Brave Love episodes. So that they will be there. I'm not as good at that. You might have noticed. So that's awesome. The funny part is that she sends me her show notes and I'm like, hey, those are my resources. That's awesome. And we haven't conferred about that ahead of time, but we have the same resources in our minds, which is great.
Well, or whatever. We have the same mind. Great. Sure. It's great.
We might have the same mind. It's a little scary. Yeah. So let me just say that I do have an upcoming masterclass. It's a free masterclass that you can look for also in the show notes. And it's on the truth about healing children who've been harmed or who are hurting from some kind of traumatic experience. And it's complex developmental trauma explained. It's a free masterclass, and in it, you learn about what the definition is for complex developmental trauma. You learn what mistakes parents make when they are living with children who have it. And then you'll also get an overview of my program, which I, of course, want you to know about, and where you can learn the Love Plus Parenting model, which is mine. And you can only get it through the Love Matters Parenting Society Therapeutic Parent Program. So that is coming up. Check it out in the show notes. Be excited to see you on the inside and get to know you. I have all kinds of trainings coming up all over. So you can find those on my Love Matters Parenting Facebook page. And do you have anything, announcements, Amanda, that you want to make?
I do want to give a shout out for your masterclass on complex developmental trauma, because I've seen it and it's great. So if anyone's on the fence, it's a great one.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome.
So, thank you all for joining us today. This is one of our favorite things to do in life, is talk about things that will help you. Amanda and I got together for coffee yesterday, and it's really hard not to be workers, right? We just talk about all this.
I was like, we're not going to talk about work. I'm going to just like be normal. But no, it's not possible, especially for us. It's just like my life passion. It's what I want to talk about. So any way I can find to help people, that's what I want to do. Yeah.
Me too. That's awesome. It's awesome. I feel like, oh, look, I have a community in you, and it feels really good to me. So yay. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us in Unmuted Love, and we'll see you next week for part 4 of Brave Love series. So looking forward. See you then. Hey parents, this is C. Get the help you need to end destructive and chaotic behavior in your home while parenting children from difficult beginnings. I know you need help, and the Love Plus parenting model actually works. I'm inviting you to work with me personally for 6 months in my virtual therapeutic parent program, and I guarantee you results, or 100% of your investment back. How is that for a blue ribbon deal? I'm looking forward to working with you. See you on the inside.
Stop for a minute. Stop and breathe for a minute. Long it over your head. Try to listen instead, won't you? Think for a minute. Who you want to be for a minute. Don't get over your head. You're like everyone else, aren't you? You could gain from being a bit nicer.
The Unmuted Love podcast is hosted by me, Ce Eshelman, attachment and trauma specialist at the Attach Place in Sacramento, California. Our podcast producer is the amazing Saya Clark, and our theme song is Nicer by Houses on the Hill, licensed through Epidemic Sound. Thank you for being such loyal listeners here on Unmuted Love. I'll see you all next week.
You'll be just fine.